Hello and welcome to the IELTS Tutor writing demonstration. Today we're going to be looking at the IELTS Writing Task 2, and specifically we're going to focus on this particular question. Now let's take a look at a Writing Task 2 question taken from the Cambridge IELTS 15 practice book. Now here we have a topic about owning versus renting a home. So if you take a look at the statement, in some countries owning a home rather than renting one is very important for people. Why might this be the case? Do you think this is a positive or negative situation? Now, as you can see, this task has actually two parts. The first part being, why might this be the case? Let's do a little bit of highlighting here. And the second part is, do you think this is a positive or negative situation? Now, when you do the IELTS Writing Task 2, it is important that you address these two parts of the question. If you only talk about the reason why people prefer to own a home rather than renting one, then you might lose marks under content, in this case task response. So it might be worthwhile to take a look at both parts of the question very carefully, and this is where planning is very important. What we're going to look at now is an example band 7 response, starting with the introduction. So here the candidate begins with, in some countries, the ownership of people's home is an important matter. In these countries, it is important to own your own home rather than renting it. It might be indifferent for some, but for these people, it matters. Okay, now this is quite an interesting opening. However, it is a good idea not to repeat the same words from the writing task itself, and to repeat words within the same sentence. So as you can see, the candidate has repeated the words important when other synonyms would do just as nicely, such as significance, vital, essential, and so on. Does this introduction contain an overview? Now, it is quite important that you present an overview of the situation, and this does not necessarily have to come in at the beginning of the essay. It can also appear at the end of the essay, but we'll have a look at that later. So if you look at the first paragraph, the introduction here, it contains some sort of overview, although it's not really very clear whether it's the writer's overview or not, or whether it's the writer's opinion or not. So if we were to rewrite it more clearly, I think that would be very helpful for the examiner to establish what the candidate's opinion is on the matter. So let's try to rewrite this with a clearer overview. So let's not repeat the same words here. As you can see, it begins with in some countries. Now we don't want to repeat this phrase here in our introduction, so we'll just change it up a little bit. Let's start with a concession, perhaps. Okay, maybe we could say something like, while it is true that many people rent properties to live in. Now this is where the writer's opinion comes in. I believe that many prefer to own their homes. Oops, didn't see that typing mistake there. Okay. Right. So let's try to get our our opinion out of the way here. Okay, so we'll just put this at the beginning of the essay rather than leave it to the last minute, which is at the conclusion. So we won't know if there would be enough time to include our opinions. And it is a good idea to always have this at the beginning of your essay, because when you're in a hurry to finish up your writing, you know, some people tend to forget certain important things, like including their opinion in the essay. And this is actually assessed by the examiner. You know, if you've forgotten to write down your opinion at the beginning of the essay, then you would probably put yourself at a disadvantage in terms of a higher score. Okay, so I believe that many people prefer to own their homes. And then we'll just add another sentence here. Apart from having a sense of permanence to their place of dwelling, why don't we just replace that with residence? To their place of residence, homeowners are able to feel a sense of control over their house or apartment. Right, so as you can see, we are trying very hard to avoid repeating the same words like home. Yeah, so we've got home, home, and so on. And instead of using that, we replace words like properties, replace it with words like properties. We can use the word homes, but as long as it's not repetitively mentioned within the same sentence or within the same paragraph even. So we've got properties, we've got place of residence, we've got house or apartment. So there are many different ways of expressing the same word. You don't really have to use a word for word synonym, but you can also, you know, restructure your sentence to let the reader know that you're referring to a place that people live in. Okay? Right, so this is the introduction that contains the writer's opinion, which is mentioned here. I believe that many people prefer to own their homes. Okay, so that is what the writer is saying. And so they need to link it to these two parts here. Why do you think many people prefer to own their homes? And is this a good or bad thing? All right. So let's take a look at a band 7 example, specifically at the body of the writing. So you can see here that the writer starts the argument with, why is that the case, with a question. Yeah, why is that the case, you might wonder? I think it is because your home is supposed to be what it sounds like, your home. As a human, I think we long after stuff to call our own. Doesn't matter what it is, but humans will always want to claim ownership. This is nothing new, and it has been like this through human history, like colonies, for example, which later, once again, became the same country as before, led by its own inhabitants. People will always want to be the one to decide what happens to them, and when you rent your home, you can't even paint it without the owner's permission. Now, this is quite a good paragraph because the writer has explored the reason in depth. So he or she is immediately providing the reason. Why do people prefer to own their homes? Yeah. And from there on, you can see that the reasons are provided. There might be a few minor errors here. However, it's easy to understand what the writer is trying to say here. So let's try and polish this up a little bit using the same ideas that the writer has given here. Now, before we delve into the body of the essay, let's backtrack a bit and take a look first at how we should be approaching the task. Now, this task comes in two parts. As you can see, the two questions here form the two parts of the task. The first one being, why might this be the case? And the second part asks, do you think this is a positive or negative situation? Remember, the candidate must address these two parts because if they don't, then the writing will fail on the basis of a lack of content in the task response criterion. Okay, let's see how we can plan this writing before we put pencil to paper. So basically, the central topic is the home. Owning it versus renting it. Now, we're going to address the first question. Why might this be the case? And then we'll make sure that we also cover the second part of the task. Do you think this is a positive or negative situation? Okay, now we'll answer the first question with reason number 1, to claim ownership. We can support this with the example of how colonies in the past have gained independence because they want to claim ownership of their own land. Then we'll mention the second reason, which is wanting to own things is a natural human characteristic. We then move on to whether or not owning a home is a good or bad thing. In this case, we will say that it's good because homeowners can make independent decisions about their own home. Then we'll move on to the part about renting. We will say that this is a negative situation because it can cause stress. We'll support this with examples of how the tenant has to cover the cost of damage to property which is not theirs in the first place. Also, there is no guarantee of whether or not they could permanently live there. But the good thing is that renters don't have to worry about huge costs of borrowing money to pay for the house or fork out a huge amount of money for upkeep. Tenants also don't need to fear about property market crashing or natural disasters destroying the homes they own. And finally, we could choose which one we agree with as our personal opinion. In this case, owning a home. Now let's get back to rewriting the body of this essay. Rather than starting with a rhetorical question, we should aim to begin with a topic sentence. Now remember that you will be assessed according to whether or not your paragraph has a purpose, and to make sure that it has, it would be a good idea to start off each paragraph with a clear topic sentence. So we will start with the ability to claim ownership is one of the reasons that people want to own homes. Here we can see that there is a controlling idea, which is the word reason. So the following sentences should support the topic with reasons why people want to own their homes. Another reason is that owning possessions is a human characteristic. The writer could then give an example of where this characteristic is reflected. This is evident throughout history, where people from colonized territories have been able to gain independence and assert their rights to possession of their own land. Now, depending on how much time you have, you can choose to briefly specify by mentioning which countries used to be colonized and how they managed to become independent. The writer then moves on to another reason why people want to own their own homes. Notice how the word likewise would be nicely linked to the last sentence to make the paragraph cohesive. Likewise, people will always want to be the ones to make decisions on the homes they live in. This could be illustrated with an example about not being able to paint the walls without the homeowner's permission. Now, the writer in the Band 7 example moves on to talk about stress. This addresses the second part of the task, which is, do you think this is a positive or negative situation? It would be a good idea to, again, begin with a topic sentence to organize your paragraphs. So here we could begin this way. Renting a house or apartment can lead to stress for several reasons, with reasons again as the controlling idea for stress. So the writer talks about damage to the property. As the property does not belong to the tenant, costs to repair any damage may have to be borne by the occupant. Depending on the extent of the damage, this could take a toll on the tenant's finances. This could then be followed by another reason for stress, which is the tenant not being able to decide for how long they could live in the rented property, for either due to unexpected situations in life or the change of a new landlord. So let's express it this way. We will link a new reason to the last sentence with apart from that, there is no guarantee that the house or apartment will be available for as long as the tenant would hope for. Circumstances may change, and in worst case scenarios, the next property owner may want to remove the tenancy altogether. Okay, now the candidate moves on to talk about the advantages of not owning your own home. Now this again answers the second part of the task about whether or not owning your own home is a positive or negative situation. So far, the writer has described in depth about why renting is a bad idea. This penultimate paragraph kinds of balances out the whole argument by providing a rebuttal and talking about how not owning your own home has its benefits. So here again, as with all other body paragraphs, it would be wise to introduce the paragraph with an appropriate topic sentence with a controlling idea. Let's take a look at this Band 9 example. However, there may be some advantages to renting property. The controlling idea here is advantages or benefits. The writer could then support this topic sentence with an explanation of not having to take out a loan to pay mortgage. So let's start with one key benefit is not having to carry the heavy financial burden of being tied down to a mortgage. This could be explained further with owning a home may mean having to take out a loan and spending huge amounts of money on maintaining the property. And then we could support the topic sentence with another advantage. We could link a new advantage to the last one with at the same time, tenants do not have to worry about the housing market crashing or natural disasters destroying their expensive home. At the end of the essay, he or she sums up the argument with their own opinion on the topic, which is that it's better to own your own home. Just like the introduction, the conclusion does not have to be long. In fact, it should not be long. One or two sentences will do just fine. So if you have not mentioned your opinion, as in this case, it is strongly recommended that you close the essay with one. Remember, if the examiner is not able to find the candidate's opinion on the topic, the candidate will most certainly lose marks for this. So, how can we improve on this? We could start with the bottom line is, it is human nature to want to have a home, and calling it your own can make that home even more special. This is then followed by the writer's opinion. Personally, I would rather own my house because I would prefer to be accountable and responsible for my own property and no one else's. And there we have it. I hope this analysis has been helpful for you. If you would like IELTS examiner feedback on your writing, speaking, listening or reading, please contact the IELTS tutor at the website theieltstutor.com. You can also chat with the IELTS tutor via WhatsApp at +44 203 289 4100. You can also reach the IELTS tutor via email at info@theieltstutor.com. Until next time, this is the IELTS tutor signing off.